One of the most common fears we have as a species is the deep, dark depths of water. Many of us have learned to respect large bodies of water for their resources, their metaphorical imagery, and very real danger, while many more of us refuse to do any of that risky stuff and stay the farthest away from those death zones as possible. That's not just me, right? Among the hundreds or thousands of bodies of water that pockmark our blue-green ball of dirt, some rank higher than others when it comes to just how plain awful they are. I generally hate lists, and especially list videos, but what Watch Mojo or Daily Dose of Internet doesn't understand is that you can make a top 10 list video with substance. Today I'll be going over 10 of the worst bodies of water on Earth, what they are, how they formed, why they're the worst, how dangerous they are, and why we should care. This will be a list of substance you won't get on your average clickbaity channel. Do excuse my clickbait light title. It's not really clickbait, but I know someone's gonna comment on it. Number 1. The Great Blue Hole, Belize. I'm sure many of you might recognize this one. This is the Great Blue Hole. The Great Blue Hole is a giant cave which has been flooded by the ocean and is located off the coast of Belize. The hole itself is 1,043 feet or 318 meters across and plunges into the depths of the ocean crust, a good 407 feet or 124 meters, which means the Heisei-era Godzilla from the 90s could stand in the hole and still be underwater. Big yikes from me. I don't have an irrational fear of the water or the ocean, but certain areas like this make me feel like I have thalassophobia. The water around the hole is so shallow that you cannot swim over the coral that lives there without bumping into it. Thankfully, you won't have to worry about that for too much longer, as the acidification and warming of the oceans will surely kill those pesky corals off.
The bummer, man. That's a bummer.
Such a nuisance, am I right? After the shallow ring of water that surrounds the hole, you're confronted with a medium-angled slope of sediment before a giant drop-off straight down to Godzilla depths. The Great Blue Hole is so dark and off-putting precisely because of its depth. Not enough light can make its way to the bottom to light up the hole, enough to be less frightening. The water temperature also drops a good 10 degrees from the surrounding water, but is overall rather safe. The formation of the hole is actually pretty interesting. The whole big patch of greenish, whitish, and tealish water surrounding the hole belongs to an atoll called Lighthouse Reef. It turns out this reef complex is one of the healthiest and best developed of the reefs in the Caribbean, so my earlier nihilistic comment doesn't yet apply to the Great Blue Hole. The hole is so deep because the hole is actually a giant cave. A cave, you say? In the middle of the ocean? Yes! Well, this sucker was created thousands of years ago when the global sea level was much lower. Based on stalactite analysis, the hole was created over the course of 4 cave-building events. The oldest one that presumably started it was 156,000 years ago, followed by one at 66,000, 60,000, and finally one at 15,000 years ago. While Ice Age megafauna like mammoths, mastodons, and ground sloths were roaming the Americas, sedimentary forces were acting on the sediments and reefs built up on this atoll. These types of features form when one type of rock weathers and erodes faster than the rock below, on top, or around it. In the case of the Great Blue Hole, it was a big ol' cave system underground, then a sinkhole caused by failure of the overlying rock and sea level rise collapsed the cave's cover, making the cave way bigger, a now vertical cave. As these things were happening, it was getting flooded by the incoming sea, and voila, you got yourself a big ol' hole. The site has been made a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is a very popular dive spot. People have and do die at the Great Blue Hole, but it's usually due to accidents and lack of diving experience rather than sinister Cthulhu behemoths lurking beneath the surface, killer steroid sharks, or even the hole itself. It's not the worst thing on this list because it's not particularly dangerous, but it's just really freaky and gross. Number 2. Lakebaikal, Russia. Continents are always moving and shifting. What happens when two distinct chunks of the Earth's crust that have been merged together for millions of years begin to separate? A rift. The two plates begin separating in opposite directions, forcing the space in between them to lower in thickness until it's below sea level and water seeps in. This continues until the area is just ocean again. A rift can occur in continental plates and oceanic plates. When in continental plates above sea level, it forms what's called a rift valley. The rift valley can remain a big-ass valley, like the cradle of humanity in Africa, where our ancient ancestors evolved. Or it can become filled in with water and just be a big-ass lake. There are plenty of areas like this worldwide, but one particular rift valley in southeastern Russia has produced the largest freshwater lake in the world by volume. Lakebaikal is the 7th largest lake in the world by surface area. It stretches 395 miles, or 636 kilometers long, and 49 miles or 79 kilometers wide. It's the clearest lake in the world, and you can see the bottom throughout much of its length. It's also the world's deepest and oldest lake, and has a bizarrely complicated history. Just take a look at this depth diagram. This is Baikal Lake, compared to other enormous water-filled holes in the ground. The reason it's the largest lake by volume, but not by surface area, is because, well, just look at how deep it is. The bottom has been measured at 3,893 feet, or 1,186.5 meters. But wait, there's more. Due to the age of this body of water, which I'll get to shortly, there's about 4.3 miles or 7 kilometers of sediment filling up the bottom of the rift lake, making the whole thing 5 to 6.8 miles or 8 to 11 kilometers deep. This gives Lake Baikal the award for deepest continental rift on Earth. This rift isn't dead and dormant either. The monster is widening by about 2 centimeters or 0.8 inches a year, accompanied by frequent earthquakes. I said it was the oldest lake on Earth, and I meant it. When this rift was starting to form and get filled in with that cool blue water, our ancestors had yet to stand up on their hind legs. The lake has been dated to around 25 to 30 million years old. It's kind of hard to comprehend how a body of water, fresh water no less, could remain in the same place for so long. Obviously it would have changed shape, volume, and area over that period of time, but still. Mammoths didn't exist, dogs as we know them today didn't exist, and the baleen and toothed whales had only just appeared. This lake is so large that it's become a major biological boon in the region. There's a bunch of species of animals only found here, approximately 1,000 species of plants and 2,500 species of animals, the largest of which is the Baikal seal, Pusa sibirica. Since it's essentially just a really big, really deep lake, it's no more dangerous than your average lake. It's been placed on this list, and this particular spot in the list, just because of how disgustingly deep it is. The thing could host entirely too many sea monsters, or the entire country of Belgium. Number 3. Jacob's Well, Texas. The next item on our quest for the worst collections of H2O on Earth isn't quite as statistically bad as the last one, but is freaky due to its false sense of security. Jacob's Well isn't actually a well, but a roughly 120-foot, 37-meter deep flooded cave system located in Wimberley, Texas. The opening is only about 12 feet or 3.7 meters in diameter and is surrounded by a short lip before the drop-off. The hole was formed as most caves are formed. Over time, slightly acidic rainwater ate away a giant hole from the surface, down deep enough to hit a natural aquifer. The Trinity Aquifer is a massive underground body of water that flows through much of central Texas. Once the cave was eaten away, the water was forced upwards due to wacky pressures. At one point in time, the water that came up from the well would squirt almost 6 feet, 1.8 meters in the air. The water spurting up from this cave flows down the bed of Cypress Creek. Though the well goes straight down for about 120 feet, it doesn't stop. It takes a turn and continues for 4,500 feet, 1,400 meters, and then levels out and turns again for another 1,000 feet, 300 meters. Thus, the whole damn thing is about 5,620 feet, 1,712 meters. It's a very popular dive spot for locals, despite having claimed about 9 lives. Those lives were lost, just like in past list items, due to weird accidents and inexperience, rather than the cave itself. That being said, it does have a few false exits and narrow passageways, kind of one of those swim at your own risk sort of spots, though you should totally still go see it. Even though I personally hate seeing that drop off into a dark, inky abyss, it's really not that dangerous, and shouldn't be rated higher than this. Number 4. The Devil's Kettle, Minnesota. On the north shore of Lake Superior, in the state of Minnesota, Judge C.R. Magny State Park harbors a bit of a mysterious phenomenon. The Brule River runs through the park, but about 1.5 miles from its mouth, the river splits in two due to a giant blob of rhyolite rock. This silica-rich volcanic rock diverts one arm of the river down a steep cliff as a waterfall. This arm splashes down the slope and continues on as part of the river. The second arm goes down a 2-step waterfall before plunging down into a hole in the rock, the eponymous Devil's Kettle. The mysterious part of this whole thing is that no one knows precisely where the part of the river that goes down the hole actually goes. If you tossed a stick there and watched it go into the hole, hoping to see it bob out of the water somewhere when the river flattens out, you'd be disappointed. That mystery has long fueled speculation about where the water goes. According to park employees, visitors have dropped everything from sticks to ping pong balls to GPS trackers. There's even a tall tale of a car being pushed into the fissure, as physically impossible as that is. One explanation was that the channel had a separate outlet back into Lake Superior, while another explanation suggested the disappearing river plunged underground for hundreds of feet or even connected to another watershed entirely. There are a few problems regarding the characteristics of the falls that have helped to foster the mystery. The layer of rock lying underneath the river is not suitable for the formation of huge underground labyrinths. The rock is also super hard volcanic rock, not soft, porous, sedimentary rock, like limestone. Of course, there are exceptions. Lava tubes can form in certain igneous rocks, which would help create big hollow pockets for transporting water. But lava tubes don't really happen in rhyolite, which is the rock which makes up the layer directly underneath the falls. The layer of rock underneath this layer is basalt, which is too deep and not formed in the proper volcanic conditions for tubes. So, no tubes. A fault could explain the disappearing river. A fault occurs when a huge volume of rock fails. It's a break or shift in rock layers, and can be seen as a line, break, or shift from one layer to another. The problem here is that there aren't any faults in the area. Even if there were faults, they wouldn't be permeable enough to drain half of the river. As enigmatic as the disappearing river is, some experiments conducted in 2016 give somewhat of an idea as to what's actually going on here. 2 Department of Natural Resources experts measured the water flow from above the falls and below the falls. They found both of their readings to be identical. This means that the amount of water and rate of flow was identical before and after the water went down the falls and the kettle. This screams that the disappearing river reconnects to the other branch of the river at some point. The reason people thought the disappearing branch of the river went somewhere else is that all of the objects thrown down the kettle never resurfaced. If both arms of the river reconnect somewhere else, shouldn't the objects reappear? According to the researchers who measured the water, the power of the water gushing through the well is a good enough explanation as to why nothing comes back up. The water holds any object down until it is blasted apart into bits. Imagine if you fell down it. This one isn't really deadly per se, but I just hate how the water disappears. Imagine slipping and being pulled down by the river before being squashed down a narrow, craggly, rocky passageway and then disintegrated by extreme water flow. Hope you've stayed with me all this time. Make sure you click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to keep up to date with Edge content. Number 5. Flathead Lake, Montana. This photo look familiar to you? How about this one? These are probably the pictures most often associated with Flathead Lake when it comes up in digital conversation. But there's less than meets the eye. These pictures of Flathead Lake are usually accompanied by descriptions of how this lake is hundreds of feet deep and as clear as glass. They say that the lake only looks shallow because of how clear that water is. This is not the case. If we use a little bit of deductive reasoning, we'll notice that the shadow cast by the boat is roughly similar in size to the boat that cast it. If the bottom was hundreds of feet away and you could see the shadow, that shadow would be minuscule. Flathead Lake is more complicated than that though. A lot of the Montana-based lake is nearly crystal clear, but of course becomes much darker the deeper it gets. This lake is unique for what it once belonged to. Flathead Lake is what's left of the gigantic, ancient Lake Missoula. Lake Missoula last saw its greatest dimensions at the end of the last ice age, and once stretched as much as 200 miles, 320 kilometers, by 57 miles, 92 kilometers. It was about 3,000 square kilometers, 7,770 square kilometers, which makes it really quite a heckin' chonker of a lake, but still half the volume of modern Lake Michigan. Lake Missoula was the result of an ice dam when a finger of the Cordilleran ice sheet inched its way into Idaho. Flathead Lake, being just a big lake, isn't really that dangerous. I have it at this point in the list because imagining boating or floating from the super clear shallow parts to the dark parts gives me anxiety. You'll see the exact point when you reach the point of no return. Number 6. The Lower Congo River, multiple countries. The next body of water isn't as much a body of water as it is a series of bodies of water that are constantly on the move. In other words, it's a river. The Congo River is an extremely long arcing river, with a basin spanning as much as 9 countries in West Central Africa. It's the second longest river in Africa, with a total length of around 2,920 miles, 4,700 kilometers. It's the 9th longest river in the world. Throughout most of its length, it's just like every other mild to moderately fast river. But the lower part of the Congo River provides a bizarre abyss of roiling, broiling, churning currents and immense canyons playing host to a whole ecosystem you'd be more likely to find in a cave or at the bottom of the ocean. The Congo River is the world's deepest recorded river at 720 feet, 220 meters in the deepest parts of the lower Congo River. About 186 miles, 299 kilometers from where the river empties into the ocean, the river bottom drops into a dangerous series of gorges, which sink 12 feet, 3.6 meters per mile. The locals have known this area was deep for a long time, but exactly how deep wasn't. Weird, eyeless, colorless fish have been coming out of the lower Congo River for decades, with scientific recognition first coming in the late 1970s. A team of biologists went to collect data from the bottom of the river in 2019 and 2020 and found huge towers of rock, stripped bare of sediments and plants by fast currents that run both upstream and downstream. It's like 2 different rivers running together, one on top and one on the bottom. The complexity of the river channels, underwater canyons, and power of currents are the reason why there is a very high biodiversity in fish species here. The hostility of the lower Congo River easily isolates breeding populations of fish in different pockets of water, and thus new cave-like or deep sea-like fish species. The massive rapids, wild currents, and vortices created from the canyon walls and separate currents means that this stretch of the river is extremely dangerous. Biological awesomeness aside, this river is disgusting and I hate it. You would easily die if you fell in. That's a big yikes for me and why I placed it this high. Number 7. Little Crater Lake, Oregon. There's a little lake in the midst of the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon that's everything I hated about pools as a kid. Little Crater Lake here is a square-shaped lake that reaches 100 feet 30 meters across and only about 14 meters deep. It's not extremely deep, large, or voluminous, but what makes it whack is the crystal clear water that provides a brilliant view of the very bottom. It's also a constant 34 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.1 degrees Celsius, meaning your muscles would seize up and you'd immediately sink and drown if you decided to go for a dip alone. The exact origin of the lake has been argued over for a while. Some geologists think it may have formed due to a collapsed lava tube due to the steep and overhanging walls. Another hypothesis is that the lake originated as a volcanic maar, a broad, low-relief volcanic crater that's the result of an explosion from contact of hot lava or magma and water. Another hypothesis thrown around is block faulting. This occurs when the crust moves and faults, cracking some parts into blocks, and then tilting and morphing them. That could have created the square hole. What is known is that the water comes from an artesian aquifer that flows deep underground. This is probably also why the water is a constant freezing temperature. This is basically a beautiful, killer Olympic swimming pool. Thanks, I hate it. Number 8. Grand Turk Dropoff. See this ledge along the beach here? This is what divers call the wall. It's a drop-off along Grand Turk Island in the Caribbean. It's one of the most popular dive sites in the Caribbean because after a moderate slope that sinks about 25 to 30 feet, 7.6 to 9 meters, the damn thing plunges to nearly 7,000 feet, 2 kilometers. This drop-off is due to a trench between two islands, the aforementioned Grand Turk Island and the Caicos Islands. There isn't much more that I can say about this because it's just a giant gash in the ocean and islands at this point. I hate it and would never dive here, despite the fact I don't dive and don't know how. Number 9. Gulf of Horyvrakhan. Between the islands of Jura and Scarba, off the west coast of mainland Scotland, lies the Gulf of Horyvrakhan. This narrow strait is infamous for its strong tidal currents and standing waves. Due to the shapes of the rock features of the bottom of this strait, the currents have created the world's third largest whirlpool. Since this has been a thing for thousands of years, and since this area has historically seen a lot of folks taking their ships from one place to another, legends have cropped up to explain the seemingly inexplicable deadly whirlpool. One of those legends details how the whirlpool was coined after a Norwegian prince who up and died while attempting to prove his love to a Scottish princess after her father gave the prince the risky task of keeping his boat afloat amidst the whirlpool for 3 nights. Another popular legend states that the whirlpool was conjured from the deep by a local sea witch to protect Scotland from an approaching Irish pirate from Ulster. Though no Scylla and Charybdis, the legends remained for centuries until someone could get in there and start testing things. Turns out there's a giant pyramid-shaped rocky pinnacle that juts up about 135 feet, 41 meters above the seafloor. This obstacle causes the whirlpool. When combined with the narrow trench of the strait, water is forced upwards when it smashes against the pinnacle, resulting in huge, swirling waves. The noise made by the whirlpool can be heard from as much as 20 miles, 32 kilometers away. This particularly watery phenomenon is this high on the list because no one comes out of the currents alive. You go in, you get sucked in and pulled down and pulverized. Some researchers even threw a mannequin equipped with a depth gauge into the vortex to see where it would suck you. Once the mannequin was retrieved, the gauge told the researchers that a person would get sucked down to over 600 feet, 182 meters. This feels like something that really ought to be in a movie. Number 10. The Bolton Strid, England. The River Wharfe is a very long and very important river that runs through Yorkshire, England. Throughout much of its length, it's your ordinary river. Never too strong and dangerous, and never completely still. There's tributaries, mild rapids, and stepped waterfalls. However, one section of the wharf, called the Bolton Strid, literally flips the script. North of the Strid, the river is your average 30-foot, 9-meter river with frothing currents and moderate waves. Once you hit the Strid, it becomes a little more tumultuous, but not by much, and the river has changed into what looks like a small bubbling creek with banks of mossy boulders. Surely, this means the river got tamer and easier to cross. What you're looking at is potentially one of the most dangerous sections of river in the world, and definitely out of all of England. This stretch of the wharf has a 100% kill rate and 0% chance of survival. People have been dying here for centuries, with plenty of stories leading back to the 1600s or earlier. This is all due to the fact that the 30-foot, 9-meter wide, 6-foot, 1.8-meter deep river twists around so that the river then becomes 30 feet, 9 meters deep, and only 6 feet, 1.8 meters wide. The water that was being pushed through the wide but shallow section then squeezes through the deep but skinny section faster due to pressure. On top of that, the mossy boulder edges of the bank of the Strid aren't the true banks. These mossy boulders are overhangs, meaning there's large open pockets underneath the boulders that stretches horizontally for an unknown length. If you go in, you get pulled down by the currents and then bashed against the rocks and held underneath the water by the overhanging boulders till you drown or you disintegrate from the blasting water. This body of water has been placed at the top of this list precisely because it's a lot more than meets the eye. Imagine just going for a stroll in this often visited locale and thinking you're safe to stand on the pseudo riverbanks and look over the water. And then you slip in and fall and die. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I live in constant fear of this place. Make sure you leave a like and comment on this video, share it around and subscribe. While you're at it, ring the notification bell too if you want to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching. Want to help Edge out? Subscribe to the Patreon at any tier you like for a whole smorgasbord of delicious offerings. Many thanks to Thea Svensson, Steve Bradshaw, Staniforth Hopkins, Nattycat, Dinosaur, Arda Bayer, Abby Smith, Henry Brennan, Dana Manchester, Chris Frampton, and Antron. You've all helped to make this channel possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you.